All right, hey everyone, ready for another deep dive? Today, let's jump into something that's, well, essential for anyone prepping for the UPSC exams. We're going to tackle the whip system in the Indian Parliament.
Ooh, yeah, the whip system. Lots to unpack there.
Exactly. And I think, it's one of those topics that can seem pretty straightforward at first glance, but then you start digging a little deeper and you realize there's a lot more to it than meets the eye, right?
Absolutely. It's got a lot of nuances and historical baggage, and to really understand how it works and why it matters, you got to look at it from different angles. Plus, the UPSC loves to test your understanding of these finer points, right?
For sure. So today we're going to try to do just that. We're going to break down the whip system, look at its origins, how it operates in practice, its connection to the anti-defection law, all that good stuff. And as always, we've got some great material to guide us.
Always good to have solid sources, right?
Definitely. We're drawing from the Indian Express and the Times of India, both of which have some really insightful articles on this topic.
Yeah, those are great resources for anyone following Indian politics, especially for UPSC prep.
Totally agree. So with that said, let's dive in. What do you say?
Let's do it.
Okay. So first things first, I think it's always helpful to start with a little bit of history. Where did this whole whip system thing come from? It sounds kind of, I don't know, a little bit intense, maybe even a bit archaic, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah, the term whip itself does sound a bit harsh when you think about it, but it's actually got a rather surprising origin story, and, well, it's not exactly what you might expect.
Okay, now you've got me intrigued.
Yeah.
Where did it come from?
You ready for this? It actually comes from the world of fox hunting.
Fox hunting. Seriously, you're kidding, right?
Nope, totally serious. It all goes back to the role of the whipper-in. That was the person responsible for keeping the hunting hounds in check during a chase. They would literally use a whip to keep the dogs from straying too far from the pack.
Oh, okay, I see where this is going. So, just like those hounds, members of parliament are expected to stick with their party line.
You got it. That's the basic analogy. The whip is all about maintaining discipline and ensuring that everyone votes according to the party's position.
Fascinating. So, from the hunting fields of England to the halls of Indian Parliament, the whip has come a long way. But how exactly did it make that journey? Like, who brought it into the political arena?
Well, the credit for that goes to a pretty famous figure, Edmund Burke, the Anglo-Irish politician and philosopher. He's the one who first used the term whip in a political context, describing how ministers in the British Parliament would rally their supporters, essentially whipping them in to vote along party lines.
So it started in the British Parliament and then crossed over to India.
Exactly. And you know what's interesting? This practice became a part of Indian politics right from the beginning of our parliamentary journey. So it's been with us since the very start.
Wow, it's a long time. But I'm guessing its role and significance have evolved over the years, right? Especially after the introduction of the Anti-Defection Law in 1985. That's a pretty crucial development, right?
Oh, absolutely. The anti-defection law was a game changer. Before that, the whip system was mostly about, keeping order and encouraging party unity.
Right, making sure everyone's on the same page, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. But with the anti-defection law, defying the whip became a much bigger deal. Suddenly, it wasn't just about party discipline, it was about the possibility of losing your seat in parliament. The stakes got a lot higher.
That makes sense. But why is voting along party lines seen as such a big deal? Like, what's the rationale behind this whole whip system thing?
Well, for parties, it's all about projecting unity and strength. They see voting on key issues as a direct reflection of their ideology and identity. So they want to showcase that everyone's on board, that they're speaking with one voice, especially during those crucial division votes where the majority really matters.
I see. It's about showing a united front. But doesn't that stifle individual opinions and create a situation where MPs just become rubber stamps for the party? I mean, where's the room for dissent or independent thought?
Yeah, that's definitely a valid concern, and it's something that, we'll delve into a bit later. But first, I think it's important to understand how the system operates in practice. The different types of whips, who issues them, what happens if you defy one, all that jazz.
Okay, sounds good.
Mhm.
Let's get into the nitty-gritty of it then. Tell me, what are these different types of whips? I've heard about like one-line, two-line, three-line whips. It sounds a bit like a secret code. What's the deal with that?
Uh-huh. Yeah, it does sound a bit cryptic, but it's actually pretty straightforward once you break it down. Okay, so basically you have three main types of whips. You got your one-line whip, your two-line whip, and then the big one, the three-line whip.
Okay, let's start with the least intimidating one. What's a one-line whip all about?
All right, so think of a one-line whip as more of a heads up. It's like a little reminder to the MPs about an upcoming vote.
So it's not like a mandatory thing.
Not really. They're encouraged to be there, of course. But
Yeah.
it's not like they're going to get in huge trouble if they miss it. They might even choose to abstain if they have a good reason.
So it's more about keeping them informed than forcing their hand.
Exactly. It's like, hey, just so you know, this vote is coming up. Be aware. Now, when you move up to a two-line whip, things get a bit more serious.
Okay, how so? What's the difference?
With a two-line whip, attendance is definitely expected. It's about showing up and being part of the process. It's a way for the party to say, look, this is important. We need everyone to be there.
I see. So it's all about how you vote and more about just showing up.
Pretty much. It's about demonstrating party unity, making sure everyone's present and accounted for. But then we get to the big kahuna, the three-line whip.
Oh, the three-line whip. This is the one I've heard the most about. It sounds pretty intense.
It is. A three-line whip is a direct order from the party leadership. No room for interpretation. You show up, and you vote exactly as instructed.
And what happens if you don't? What are the consequences of defying a three-line whip?
Well, that's where the anti-defection law comes into play. Violating a three-line whip can actually get you disqualified from Parliament. The party can basically say, hey, this person isn't following the party line, they need to go. And the presiding officer of the House has the authority to remove them.
Wow, that's pretty serious stuff. So it's not just about party discipline anymore. It's about your entire political career.
Exactly. It's a big deal. And that's why the three-line whip is usually reserved for those really crucial votes, the ones where the party absolutely needs everyone on board.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So we've got the one-line whip, which is more informational, the two-line whip, which emphasizes attendance and unity, and then the three-line whip, which is basically a non-negotiable order.
Yep, you got it. That's the whip system in a nutshell. But of course, there's always more to the story, right? Like, we've talked about the mechanics of it, but what about the bigger picture?
Right. What are the implications of this system for, Indian democracy as a whole? Some people argue that it can actually stifle dissent and prevent MPs from truly representing the interests of their constituents.
That's a great point, and it's something that's been debated for a long time. Because on the one hand, you have this need for stability and coherence in government, right? You need parties to be able to function effectively, to pass legislation, to implement their agendas.
Yeah, I get that. If everyone's voting randomly, it's going to be pretty hard to get anything done.
Exactly. But on the other hand, you have this concern about individual voices being silenced, about MPs just becoming puppets for the party leadership.
It's like, where's the line between party loyalty and, actually representing the people who elected you?
It's a tough question, and honestly, there's no easy answer. It's something that each MP has to grapple with.
That
Trying to find that balance between their own conscience, their party's stance, and the needs of their constituents.
It sounds like a real dilemma. But isn't there a perspective that, since they're elected on a party ticket, they're kind of obligated to follow the party line? Like that's what the voters signed up for, right?
That's a valid argument, and it's one that's often made, especially by party leaders. And it's true that voters do tend to choose candidates based on their party affiliation, at least in part.
Right. It's not like people are voting for individuals in a vacuum. They're voting for a set of ideas, a platform, a vision that the party represents.
Exactly. And that's why some people argue that the whip system is actually a reflection of the voters' will. Because by voting for a particular party, they're essentially endorsing its policies and positions.
So the whip system is just a way of ensuring that those policies and positions are actually implemented.
That's the argument. But of course, the debate continues, because critics of the whip system say that it goes too far, that it stifles healthy debate and prevents MPs from truly representing the diverse interests of their constituents.
It's like, if you can't even vote your conscience on certain issues, are you really representing the people who elected you?
It's a valid point, and it's something that, India's political system is constantly grappling with. Like, how do you balance the need for party unity with the importance of individual expression and dissent?
Yeah, it's a complex issue with no easy answers. It's like there are valid points on both sides.
Exactly. And it's something that, as UPSC aspirants, you should be thinking about critically. Because
Yeah.
the UPSC loves to test your understanding of these nuances. They might ask you to analyze the pros and cons of the whip system or to evaluate its impact on Indian democracy.
So it's not just about memorizing facts and figures. It's about being able to think critically about these complex issues.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this whole topic so fascinating, right? Because it gets to the heart of how our democracy works, how power is distributed, how decisions are made.
For sure. And speaking of fascinating, you mentioned earlier that even the vice president of India has weighed in on this debate.
Mhm.
What's his take on the whip system?
Oh, yeah. Vice President Jagdeep Dhankar, he's been pretty vocal about his criticisms of the whip system.
Okay, what are some of his main points?
Well, he's argued that it restricts the freedom of expression of MPs and creates a culture of, servility where they're afraid to express their true opinions.
So he sees it as a threat to, like, genuine democratic debate.
Exactly. He's
Yeah.
even questioned the very necessity of whips, like why do we need them in the first place? He thinks they prevent representatives from exercising independent judgment and truly representing the interests of their constituents.
Wow, that's a pretty bold statement. But it does make you think, right? Like, what's the alternative? How do you maintain order and stability without some sort of whip system?
That's the big question, and one that, people are still trying to answer.
So we've been exploring this idea that, the whip system could be suppressing dissent in Parliament, preventing those really robust discussions from happening.
Right, and we've heard some pretty strong criticisms from, well, even from the vice president himself.
Exactly. But it's important to remember there's always another side to the coin, right?
Oh, absolutely. Not everyone sees the whip system as, this big bad wolf stifling democracy.
So what are some of the counter arguments? Why do some people believe the whip system is actually essential for a functioning democracy?
Well, the biggest argument you hear is that, look, you need some level of order and stability in Parliament, right? Imagine if every single MP just voted however they felt on any given day, regardless of what their party's stance was.
Yeah, that sounds like it could get pretty chaotic pretty fast.
It would be total chaos. Trying to pass legislation, implement policies, even just maintain a consistent agenda, it would be almost impossible.
Okay, so it's about making sure the government can actually function, that it's not just a bunch of individuals going off in different directions.
Exactly. And look, proponents of the whip system, they'll often say, hey, it's not like we're completely silencing dissent. MPs are still free to voice their concerns within the party, right?
Right? They can have those internal debates, try to sway their colleagues, maybe even influence the party's position on certain issues.
Exactly. And there are even times when parties allow for what's called a conscience vote, where members are actually free to vote according to their personal beliefs, even if it goes against the party line.
Oh, interesting. So there is some flexibility built into the system.
There is. It's not always black and white. And plus, like any aspect of our democracy, the whip system is constantly evolving.
Right. It's an ongoing conversation.
Exactly. There's always room for debate, for reform, for finding that balance between party unity and individual expression.
And that's where we come in, right? It's up to us as engaged citizens to think critically about these issues, to participate in these conversations, and to help shape the future of our democracy.
Absolutely. Whether you're a UPSC aspirant studying for those exams or just someone who cares about how our country is run, it's so important to stay informed and to engage in these debates.
Well said. And on that note, we've reached the end of another deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground today, explored some complex issues, and hopefully sparked some thought-provoking discussions.
Hopefully.
As always, a huge thank you to our sources, the Indian Express and the Times of India, for their insightful articles. And of course, a massive thank you to you, our listeners, for joining us on this journey.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this deep dive with anyone who might find it helpful. And until next time, keep those brains buzzing.